Think that if you're going to do a major story on the President of the United States, you should probably have a source and probably be anchored to some type of facts. Lawrence O'Donnell was missing both. He came out and basically accused the president of having his loans co-signed for major purchases by oligarchs in Russia. I'm not kidding. Listen.
This single source close to Deutsche Bank has told me that Donald Trump's loan documents there show that he has co-signers. That's how he was able to obtain those loans, and that the co-signers are Russian oligarchs.
What? Really?
That would explain, it seems to me, every kind word Donald Trump has ever said about Russia and Vladimir Putin, if true. And I stress the if true.
Stressing the if to was pretty important because just 24 hours later, Lawrence O'Donnell somewhat apologized and said that he was wrong to report the unvetted story.
Last night on this show, I discussed information that wasn't ready for reporting. I repeated statements a single source told me about the president's finances and loan documents with Deutsche Bank, saying, if true, as I discussed the information, was simply not good enough. I did not go through the rigorous verification and standards process here at MSNBC before repeating what I heard from my source. Had it gone through that process, I would not have been permitted to report it. I should not have said it on air or posted it on Twitter. I was wrong to do so.
So there he is apologizing, and NBC is retracting that. Let's bring in Mollie Hemingway, Fox News contributor, senior editor at the Federalist, and the author of Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court. Mollie, you got to wonder why he apologized. We know that apparently the Trump Organization threatened legal action unless within 24 hours they got an apology and a retraction, and they did. What are your observations about what we just saw over on that other channel?
It's just kind of a reminder of what the country went through for several years, where blockbuster stories were promised that would show definitively that Donald Trump was a traitor who had colluded with Russia to steal the 2016 election. They were frequently based on anonymous sources, very thin sourcing. The stories always fell apart under scrutiny, as evidenced by the fact that the Mueller probe concluded with not only no information about Donald Trump colluding with Russia to steal the 2016 election, but not a single American. There's no evidence of any American doing this. And yet this is what the narrative was. It was so sad to see it for years, this daily drumbeat before the Mueller report ended. To see that some people are still doing it months after is embarrassing and sad.
Mollie, the amazing thing is the momentum was so great around the Russia story for 2.5 years that this would have been part of the blizzard of information, unverified, rumored, battered around, experts brought in, what if, and next thing you know, the approval rating goes down, a major distraction for the White House, no one's talking about policy. This has been the story for 2.5 years, but now it's standing out because very few people are buying the Russia narrative.
Well, I wish that were true, except actually polls have shown that a majority of Democrats believe false things about Russia's involvement with the U.S. election. Not that Russia doesn't meddle, that they do that, and they've done that for a very long time. But these specific stories alleging treason on the part of the Trump administration or Donald Trump or people close to him, there is not evidence to support this, and yet the stories have been happening. And it's not just MSNBC. You had multiple failures at multiple media outlets, and rather than seeing any examination or looking at why they were able to fall for such a ridiculous story, people got awards for their reporting. And the main story, which is how this treasonous collusion narrative got started, how it was weaponized, how it was fed throughout the U.S. government, is a story that continues to be undercovered at nearly every media outlet.
You know, Mollie, Lawrence O'Donnell talked about the rigorous vetting process at MSNBC that they supposedly have for stories about Russia, saying he went around that process. But based on everything you've just said, it doesn't seem like a number of these media outlets who have run with the story have a vetting system at all and really are relying on confirmation bias and anonymous sources, as you said, with the lack of evidence.
And it's not just the Russian narrative. I mean, I think back, I just wrote this book with Carrie Severino on the Kavanaugh confirmation. During that process, you had people, again at MSNBC, reading unverified allegations against Justice Kavanaugh for which there was no evidence in support, just reading them on the air, as if it doesn't cause people harm to smear someone's reputation. That is a real harm. And again, no one held accountable for for doing this, and it's across many different stories, and there seems to be a pattern. These errors always seem to go one way, and that can't be coincidence.
And it's across a number of outlets as well, as you said earlier. Stephanie Grisham, the White House press secretary, tweeted this out yesterday. I believe it was yesterday. CNN is so biased and dishonest, they just use one of my quotes out of context from another story to try and further their own partisan political agenda, weaponizing journalism in an effort to undermine this president and those who work for the administration and country must stop. You know, we should point out there are people on television who are journalists, and then there are people on television who are pundits or, you know, commentators and stuff like that. But these days it's kind of hard to tell the difference in many cases.
It's incredibly hard to tell whether that's print media or television media because so many reporters are so open about their extreme bias. But using quotes out of context is just one of the many tools that journalists have used in a way that is obvious to people is unfair. The way they frame stories, their selective use or misuse of information, taking quotes out of context or snipping them to say one thing. And this is why the polls indicate that credibility is just very bad for the media, that so many people do not trust them because they've seen what they've been doing for a long time. It is not a healthy situation.
And by the way, there's two stories out there the president has pushed back on right away, that he wants to nuke hurricanes. He said that he never wanted to say, I was ever going to send a nuclear missile into a hurricane. And the number two story that he was going to say is, anybody who builds a wall on private property, don't worry about it. I'm going to pardon you. So if you build that wall, don't worry about it. He says, I never said that. Next thing you know, you have 6 hours worth of debates and pundits weighing in on why the president is such an outlaw president. He said, no one even asked me if this was true or not.
And it seems that this is getting worse instead of better over time. This is a president who is extremely different than previous presidents. There should be more than enough real things to talk about if people want to highlight how he is different or operates differently than previous administrations. There is no need to make things up. And in fact, it is very damaging and harmful. And again, it makes people unable to trust their media figures.
And I do ask the president, if he's going to shoot off a nuclear missile, do it before it hits Florida. To stop the hurricane.
The problem is the fallout.
We're not going to use nukes against hurricanes.
Okay,
not
going to do it.
Mollie Hemingway, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And be sure to catch Brian's interview with President Trump today on his radio show at 9:34 Eastern Time. Not 9:35, 9:34.
That's our break structure.
We have a lot of things to talk about.
I don't want to get there early, hear a commercial, and think, okay, not today. It's also, as Steve brought up before, it's streaming on Fox Nation, so it's lit like a television show. So if you don't get the stream on the radio, you could actually watch it on your app.
So download the app immediately. All right.